Now, for more discussion on the end of the Merkel era, we're joined in studio by Jackson James. He's a senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Welcome to the show.
Nice to be here.
So let's start with the condition of Germany's economy. We saw some low growth in 2019, and the country narrowly avoided a technical recession as well. Where do you see it heading in 2020?
Well, a lot of it depends, of course, on what's going on around it. And Brexit is, of course, one issue that's going to have a major dent. And the larger issue of trade wars going on, so to speak, between the United States and China, both of which are huge markets for Germany. So if there's a slowdown in all of those cases, Germany's going to take a hit.
We've certainly seen the auto market really coming into the spotlight, not just from pressure from the United States, but you also have global car sales falling and more companies turning to electric and autonomous vehicles, both of which require fewer workers, fewer parts, and are easier to assemble. When you're a car powerhouse like Germany, what does that mean for you?
Transition and transformation. And in a way, there are catching up. In the electric car industry, I just found it interesting that Tesla decided to build in Germany the other day. There is a catch-up period, though, because of the enormous impact of the automobile industry, gas-driven, over these last 70 years. And I think that they're going to have to play that game extremely well to not lose the market share. At this point, it's also got an impact on employment. There are 2 million, possibly 3 million, if you count everybody, that are dependent on the automobile sector in Germany. It's a huge number.
We've certainly seen some restructuring, some layoffs already starting to happen. Now, we know that Chancellor Merkel is set to step down in 2021. As you look back, obviously hindsight is 2020, but what do you see as her biggest successes and her shortcomings?
Well, I think in success terms, let's call it just sustainability. I mean, she's about to actually equal the record of Helmut Kohl if it holds this coming year. At 16 years as chancellor. That's an amazing accomplishment. And I think that to some extent goes along with having dealt with a Europe that was also coming apart at the seams on occasion. First the euro, and now the immigration issue, and then of course you have the populist nationalist backlash, Brexit a good example. So I think, quite frankly, one of her best accomplishments was simply holding Europe together. And where it goes from after her departure is a good question. The other side of that is the fact that she was someone who was able to keep people confident in her leadership. Otherwise, she would have been elected 4 times, right? But I think that the notion is that the speed with which change is going on around Germany and Europe, and certainly around the global stage, is not keeping up with that particular process of her saying, "I've got this." And that's why the next person's job is going to be so difficult.
And we certainly saw that with immigration. That certainly began to be something of a divisive subject within the coalition. How do you see immigration and migration? How do you see that as being handled during Merkel's term and that impact on the German economy?
Well, certainly we saw the major point in 2015 when Chancellor Merkel opened the doors and said to 1 million plus immigrants, "You have a home here," or at least she welcomed them. She'd had to kind of roll that back in certain ways because of the fact that so many people were listening to her when she said, "You know, we can do this, wir schaffen das." And then they turned around and said, "Yes, but how?" And so that process continues. The integration, the ability to deal with the enormous amount of cultural differences. And to some extent, I think that it has been able to be handled. The price for that, however, is political blowback. And I think that's the problem that Germany is going to have to face, like all the other countries in Europe. And I think that to some extent, again, the post-Merkel period is going to have that on their agenda.
Now, when you're Europe's biggest economy and you're seeing this risk of political blowback, what does that mean in terms of then perhaps repercussions for the rest of the EU?
Well, certainly as the largest economy, you're not just talking about Germany when you're talking about economic strains, you're talking about the entire EU. And so much depends on Germany as the locomotive. And so I think that to some extent, the ability to keep up pace with the political instability, the unpredictability, which of course is anathema to business, is one of the biggest challenges ahead. We don't know what the impact of Brexit is going to be in the longer run. We do know that it's going to have an impact on Germany. It already has. Just because of the fact that the export industry is going to be hit with all of the complications that will go along with the Brexit. So I think in general, the issue is going to be balancing economic stability with political predictability, and that's a hell of a balancing act.
And so just quickly, as we look at the potential successors for Angela Merkel, which one is more likely to sort of keep the boat going versus perhaps be the most disruptive?
Well, I think that there will be obviously a continuing of the European Union trying to find its way beyond where it is now. I think that they are going to have to figure out a way to combine forces so that they can deal with economic issues, they can deal with immigration issues, they can deal with military and defense issues. These are all demands that are going to be put on Europe. But I think that to some extent the issue is going to be how do you balance those things with a Europe that is clearly going to have to redefine itself and find answers for a public that is very skeptical.
We'll certainly be watching. Thank you so much for your insights. Jackson James there, Senior Fellow at the German Marshall Fund of the US.